You're listening to the Be So Good podcast with Colin Pearce. Colin says you are 10 times better than you think. So why not be so good they can't ignore you? Here he is, Colin Pearce.
It takes 10 years to get the who's who and 10 seconds to get the who's through. Well, the audience packed up laughing because we've been listening to a fairly dramatic tale by Michael Harrison about how he had risen and fallen in the financial and banking industry. And yet, here he is 27 years later, a higher level than he ever was. And I want you to hear his story because he's a fascinating and clever man. Michael, start from the beginning.
Morning, Colin. Well, I'm not sure where the beginning starts, but I suppose in memory, my beginning starts at school. Apparently I wasn't an easy child. And so my parents at one stage decided that I would be better off at boarding school. That's like saying, get out of here because you give me the whatevers. Anyway, off I went to Geelong Grammar. Geelong Grammar was quite an interesting experience. First year I was there, we were at Corio, and the most significant thing I remember was that the first day I met the headmaster, I was walking towards the door and I was about to walk through the door without opening it for my mother, and that didn't result in a very satisfactory arrangement. I was taught very quickly that you held doors open for ladies. That was back in the days before equal opportunity and gender equality, of course. Now you don't have to do any of those things. So that was
we still do.
Yeah, well, that was the first experience. And then I was lucky enough to be there at a time when, firstly, Geelong Grammar was a male-only school, and secondly, we had a year called Timbertop. Timbertop was located near Mansfield in Victoria in the countryside, so it was pretty cold country, snow country, and we were taught there to be self-sufficient. And so at day one, I arrive at Timbertop and I know nothing about it. I'm a city boy. And anyway, there were fortunately a few country boys who did have an insight because they'd had older brothers and so on. But the first thing I learned is that if you wanted to have hot water for a shower in the morning, you had to cut some wood. And if you didn't stoke your own boiler, you didn't have any wood. So we were in dormitories of 10 people, or 10 students, 10 boys. And we had to share out the tasks, cut the wood, do all of those sorts of things to ensure there were hot showers in the morning.
I've heard that you shared a dormitory with Prince Charles.
No, that's not right. Prince Charles attended Timbertop in different digs to students and didn't attend for a full school year. I think it was more like a royal visit to look at Australia rather than a part of education, but that's a different story.
So he didn't cut his own wood for his boiler shower?
I've no idea what he did. He had staff.
Oh, I see. So you didn't even get to have his shadow fall across your path?
No.
Oh, that's disappointing. Here I've held you in great esteem because you must have rubbed shoulders with the great and famous. But no.
But I do rub shoulders with the great and famous. I know you. That's probably all I need. Aren't you the author of multiple children's tales and books and all sorts of wonderful things?
Yes. Back to you. Have you ever cut wood since then?
No, what for?
And I believe you went camping a lot. You had to go out in threes.
Yes.
Have you gone camping?
So one of the things that we did in those days was we would go away for a weekend camp, and you'd draw supplies on a Friday afternoon, food and whatever you needed for the weekend, and you'd go in groups of 3 or a minimum of 3. the idea was that if something went wrong, one of you got injured, there would be one to stay with the injured person and one to go for help. And we were taught to be pretty self-sufficient. Now, of course, you did learn over a period of time that there were some greater opportunities whilst you were away from school. And there was a nearby river, the Hauqua, that was very convenient as a refrigerator. You could store bottles of drink in it and keep them nice and cold.
I see.
And of course, it would have been always non-alcoholic drink.
I'm sure.
Actually. And we also discovered, the group that I was with discovered that there was a little hut on the Hauqua. Now, we were supposed to be camping in tents and supposed to, of course, tell the school where we were going to be and all of those sorts of things. But my most vivid recollection is one weekend we spotted this lady with a child near the hut that we were occupying, and there was a snake slithering nearby. And so I thought we better do the right thing, and went and killed the snake to protect the lady and child. And unfortunately, she rang the school to thank them for how wonderful we were. And of course, we weren't supposed to be there. So I had a new experience. I learnt why the headmaster up there's nickname was Basher Montgomery. So that was all part of the Timbertop experience, but it was a great year. I came back to town, and I finished my schooling actually at Melbourne High, and that year I learnt that I wasn't a bad sort of snooker player. And there's a place in the city that called Artie's that I used to, after morning roll call, I'd go and frequent for the morning and get myself into, try and hustle a little bit playing snooker. I don't even know if snooker halls exist anymore, and my eyesight's not so good, so it wouldn't matter. But
I had no idea you were such a reprobate. I thought you lived on the straight and narrow.
Well, then I got a job after that, so it was a different world.
Let's go on to the job, because it takes us into selling and the advance of your career. You were selling shoes first, weren't you?
Well, I got a job as an executive trainee at Myers, and as an executive trainee, they put you into a department, and I was put into the ladies' shoe department. So I used to, as an executive trainee, I used to attend what the equivalent of a TAFE course did, accountancy at night, and work during the day. And what I learned is that women are very picky about their shoes. It doesn't matter actually if the shoe doesn't fit. It could be too big. They just put a bit of padding in it to make it fit. It could be too small. They'd stretch it. As long as it made them look good, it was all that mattered. And that was the first thing I learnt about selling, is that if you could make someone feel good and if you could make them look good, they would buy. You didn't have to do any selling. So that was my ladies' shoe experience.
So what got you into finance?
I found that I wasn't progressing as far as I'd like at Myers. Well, that was because it was a job. And I teamed up with a couple of guys I knew. We decided in 1970, we decided that the future would be computers. So we started a computer service bureau, and there were three of us involved. One guy was a systems analyst, one was a programmer, and I was the salesman. And we went out, and I managed to get some customers on board. Now we're talking a different era in computers. There's nothing like a personal computer. We rented time on a thing called an IBM 360 that needed special air conditioning and special room with special flooring so that you could run the cables under the floor and all sorts of stuff. And this thing was fed on punch cards. So we had all these punch cards operators. So anyway, we landed an account for a large pathology group in Melbourne. And one day I was having a look at the output, the reams and reams of paper that came out on sprockets at the end of the printer. But I noticed there was a bit of a discrepancy. There seemed to be more billing, more money that was being billed than was coming in. And so I started to do a bit of investigation, and that resulted in the office manager of this particular pathology group being awarded 6 years at the pleasure of Her Majesty or His Majesty. I'm not sure, it was back then, it was Her Majesty still. And we got a fair bit of publicity. And the result of that was that we sold the business for what was pretty good deal on that time. And I found myself in working for the new owners. Well, that only lasted for a very short time because I didn't really enjoy being an employee and not being able to make decisions for myself. So I decided to seek greener pastures, and I had a bit of money, so I decided to travel around Australia, and I drove from Melbourne to Sydney and Sydney to Brisbane, and then up north, and then across the country into WA. And anyway, 5 months later, I was driving back to Melbourne because I lived in Melbourne in those days. And on the way, I found this quaint little village called Adelaide. And I thought, I'll stay for a weekend. And so I stayed in Adelaide, and I looked around. It was interesting because there were cottages selling for about $7,000, and I'd never known anything so cheap. And so I'm thinking to myself, I can make a fortune in this joint. They got no idea. And anyway, that weekend there was an advertisement in the paper, and it said, life insurance, no experience necessary. Well, I qualified. I didn't have any experience. So I went and applied, and I got the job. And so I started selling life insurance. And anyway, 3 years later, I was the top producer for the life insurance company that I worked for. And I was actually producing, I think it's somewhere between 25 and 30% of their production. And I decided the company was owned by UK owners. And I did a deal with them and went into business with them, setting up an executive compensation business in Sydney.
And this led to you going, sorry, I was going to say this led you to be seated at the top of the table at the $1 Million Round Table.
Yes, I made it to $1 Million Round Table, I think in year 3, and I made it to the top of the table a couple of years later, and I've stayed there for a number of years. So no longer a member, but I've been back as a speaker a few times. But yeah, I had a lot of fun in those days. But what it did is it introduced me to a large number of successful clients, and a lot of those people, I noticed that they had particular needs that weren't being met. And one of them was to have a more flexible banking arrangement. So I found a partner and decided that I was going to set up a private bank. Now, it actually wasn't a private bank in the true sense, because we didn't have a banking license. We had our checks cleared by the NAB back in those days, but we looked like a bank and we felt like a bank. And, you know, if it looks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, well, we called ourselves a private bank, and we got a lot of clients, and we did all right out of it for a number of years.
I have to say that my brothers have always said of me that I had a bigger front than Grace Brothers, but you would have the biggest front of anybody I know. No experience, top of the table insurance, no qualifications, no license.
Well, hang on, I passed my, hang on, I did pass my accounting. You know, I mean, you know, I passed in the 20% of the class that made the top 80% possible, but I still passed.
And you did chop your own wood for your shower. Yes, that's all the qualifications you need.
Well, we were all hit by the crash of 88. And anyway, my partner was by then a $1 billion insurance company. So they were a finance company. They sold out to a New Zealand company. The New Zealand company sold out to an insurance company, NZI Insurance. And so NZI became my new partner. 88, the crash hit, they got caught. We'd been lending money to some of Australia's rich and famous, like Laurie Connell and Alan Bond and some other notorious names.
Oh, you sure can pick them.
And some of the loans turned out to be grants. We didn't actually see the money back. Anyway, NZI decided that they couldn't be in the business any longer. They needed to liquidate their assets. And so I thought, well, that was pretty good. I bought them out at a discount. Anyway, 2 years later, the share market had already crashed in 88. And 2 years later, in 1990, we had the property crash. And most of our loans were secured by second mortgages. And what happens with the second mortgage is the first mortgagee goes in and starts hitting them with penalty interest because they haven't paid, and the second mortgage is worth nothing. So sadly, on the 7th of September 1990, my goodness, 30 years ago now, I had to appoint a receiver to that business.
Wow, and that was a great birthday present.
So that was the start of the crash. And that's why I say it had taken me about 10 years to make it to Who's Who and about 10 minutes to make Who's Through.
Wow.
So I spent a couple of years in the wilderness looking around, trying to decide what to do. And then...
Tell me, you must have been heartbroken to see that happen, to see that happen to you, Mr. Biggest Front of All. Yes, well,
I don't know about the biggest front of all, but no one's happy to lose money, and no one's happy to be in their own mind to appear that they've failed.
Yeah.
I've been on the Adelaide City Council, and I'd been on a number of things. You know, I was a pretty big shot in those days. I used to, as you say, had a lot of front. I mean, you call it front. I of course call it, you know, just being a very intelligent business operator.
Confidence. Okay. What brought you back? How did you come back from all of that? Dipped into your confidence, well, and had to find a market or a need.
Well, after I think about 17 or 18 months of feeling sorry for myself, it's actually interesting. I joined this organisation called National Speakers, which was just starting in Adelaide, first meeting, and they had a conference, and I went to this conference and I heard one of the speakers, this woman named Robin Henderson, actually, who told the story of how she'd written a book. And I think if I remember, she talked about the fact that, you know, that the typewriter had some keys that weren't working properly and all sorts of stuff. But I listened to this story and I got inspired, and I decided that I would write a book about my experience, about what made me successful and what I'd learned. And, you know, people would definitely want to hear from me about how successful I'd once been. Anyway, so...
Ready, Aim, Sell, wasn't it?
Yeah, so I wrote this book, Ready, Aim, Sell. It wasn't a very big book, and but it took me about 40 days, I think, to write this thing. And I set a target of 5 pages a day. Most days I chopped out the 5 pages and started again. But anyway, eventually I wrote the book. And again, sometimes in life you get a little bit of luck. And I'm not quite sure how it happened, but some guy rang up and got a copy of the book and he did a review of it. Interesting fellow from a company called the Results Corporation, Chris Newton, did a review of this book, and someone at the MLC read it, and they wrote to me and bought a copy of the book. And then the next thing I knew, they decided that they would buy, I think it was 500 copies for their annual conference. And then they got me along to talk at the annual conference, and I found that I could actually talk. I didn't know that I could.
Oh, wow.
And so...
and they paid you.
Sorry?
Yeah, and you discovered that people paid you.
I discovered that as well. Yes, that was in the early days. I was happy just to sell the books and talk for nothing. But then I'd heard this fellow named Winston Marsh and another one, Doug Maloof, and they'd been talking about how you needed to go to Rotary clubs and practice. And so I did that. I actually went and did a whole lot of Rotary speeches, got a whole lot of spoons and glasses and things as payment. But but I actually learned that you can go and tell a story and people would listen and pay a bit of attention. So I had this new career as a speaker. Wasn't a very expensive speaker, but I was a speaker, and I went out and I spoke about my experience. And the more I spoke, the more I found that people were prepared to buy books and to listen to me. And then I managed to get onto the multi-level marketing circuit, and I found that I could, in a good session, I'd sell a couple of hundred books at the back of the room for $20 each, and so it went. And so this was my new career. And in those early days, I was doing about 150 talks a year. These days, I don't do any if I can avoid it. But I learned a lot about different types of business and selling and so on. And then, as luck would have it, and it's funny, you get a few breaks in life. So I'd been doing this for a while, and one day a fella rang me and said, look, our marketing's not working as well as we'd like it to. Could you come and have a look at it? And it was one of the insurance companies. And I went in on a 12-month contract to have a look at their marketing, and found that they'd had 6 marketing departments all competing with each other within the company. And, they had one for direct business, and they had one for general insurance, and one for life insurance, and one for something else, and one for social media, and one for graphic. Oh man, they just no one spoke to each other. They just all competed with each other. So anyway, that was, managed to sort that out and get a pretty good result out of it.
You were with them for how long? 18 months or something, weren't you?
There for 12 months, roughly.
Yes. Are we allowed to say the name? Would they own you today?
It was a major insurer. Anyway, a few months later, I got a call from another person who actually was the head of Zurich's life insurance business in Australia. And he said something similar: could you come and have a look at our business? Because, we've heard you've been in life insurance, you understand it. And so I went in and had a look, and basically on a 3-month deal, and I wrote them a report on what I thought was wrong and what I'd do. And to be honest, the way I compiled that report was mostly I got a group of their top advisors together and set them down in a room and said, if you were designing a new company from scratch, what would it look like? And I just documented all that, put it back in the form of a report, and they said, would you come and do it? And I said, well, yeah, as long as I get a free hand to run the business my way. I'd never run a life insurance company before, but I figured that what's to stop me? And so I devised a plan. We entered into a 3-year agreement. The 3-year agreement actually got extended twice by a year. And over that 5 years, I managed to grow the business by 700%.
700%.
Yeah, I just, again, I got a bit lucky. I learned that if you actually go and find out what people want and help them get it, you can grow a business. And that applied both to the internal people as well as the external people, the salespeople who sold on our behalf.
What's coming through this story is, I've always said, it doesn't take that much to be that much better. I mean, racehorses win millions of dollars by a nose, golfers win by a putt, tennis players win by a hit over the net. And we've often talked about who is the smartest guy in the room while we're sitting alone in a restaurant. You probably, I think you've always seen yourself as a fairly straightforward, ordinary chap, not blessed with massive IQ and high breeding. You have built that for yourself. You have taken a risk now and again. You've had a little bit of confidence added to it, and you've just had a go. And the amazing thing is you've had more results and better results from having a go than most people ever would.
Well, I think life is about having a go, but I think it's also about some very simple things. And so, I mean, if you look at a business, for example, businesses are not that complex. Now, you need to get a few things right, but effectively, you've got to be able to operate your business. So you've got to have a back office system that works, and you've got to be able to sell your business. So you've got to have a sales system that works. Now, depending on the type of business, that'll change, but the formula doesn't change. I use a formula that I've used the acronym COST, and COST is, let's look at the current situation. The C stands for current. What is it now? What does it look like? How does it appear? How's it working? What works? What doesn't work? And so on. The O in cost is opportunities. What are the opportunities that are in the marketplace? What would they like to achieve? Where are the opportunities? S is the strategy. What sort of strategy will I put in place? And the T is for tracking. How am I going to track it? Now, I know that's simplistic, but if you look at the world today, I work in the financial service world. If you go back a few years, we used to have banks with branches, and you'd go into the bank and you'd talk to the bank manager, or you'd talk to the teller and you'd draw your money out. I remember when one of the banks consulted with me some years ago when they were talking about putting in telephones with screens for their customers so that the customer could bank using the telephone with a screen. Well, that basically was a fizzer, but the idea was good, and the idea translated to things called ATMs. So what happened was that the teller got replaced and the people effectively did their own banking. Now, if you look at the world today, the ATMs are being pulled out by the banks because most people are simply using the internet and banking online. Now, along with that comes more opportunity, because there's been over the years a lot of credit card loss due to fraud. That will improve with fingerprint technology, but now with facial recognition going forward, that'll drive the technology. So what's happened is that the customer still wants banking services, but the way the banking services are being provided is changing as the years go by, and will continue to change.
Yeah.
A blockchain will change it even again in terms of adding another level of security. Cryptocurrencies may or may not get some traction. I personally don't have a lot of faith in them, but I see them as being something similar to a share market boom. But who knows? You've got to keep an open mind with all these things. But whatever the opportunity is, you look for the opportunity and you seize it. So when I'm talking to my clients, I'm always looking, what's the opportunity in your business? What could you be doing that you're not doing? What do your clients want that you don't know about? And so that's
You're like a terrier with those questions. I mean, you've been into the trouser leg or the bottom of my pants many times over what could you be doing and why aren't you doing it and so on. So I get that. Well, we're going to wrap this up and talk to you again about some sales techniques at another time, but you are currently chair of Synchron, and
Yes.
you've moved that company from 19 or 45 representatives to how many?
Well, when I joined Synchron, there was, I think, about 80. Most of them were geriatrics. Today, see, we saw an opportunity. So today, Synchron has something over 500 advisors around the country. But the much more interesting statistic is that 50% of them are under the age of 50. In fact, I think that 45% are under the age of 45. And that was a deliberate strategy to develop a program that attracted young people into the financial planning or financial advice industry. And because they're the lifeblood, they're the future of the industry.
And
now,
that's no mean feat because insurance, banking, the whole finance industry has been through the ringer, and it's almost frightening to enter, but you've made it attractive.
Well, yes, although the government's trying pretty hard to make it unattractive. That's a different topic for a different day. That sounds like you didn't turn your phone on to silent. That's very poor for an interviewer.
See, you never give up, do you? I get everything else right. I call you wonderful, and then you insult me.
Oh dear. So anyway, life continues to be interesting. I'm only a young fellow, as you know.
Yes, and you're a grandfather of 7, a father of 5.
8.
Grandfather of 8 now. Goodness me. You had to go one better. Always have to go one better, don't you?
Yes, I try. But
yeah. Are you on any boards now? Are you on any boards, or you're running for Prime Minister or anything?
I've actually given up. I had another job offer just recently, and I explained to the people that I'm now 76 years of age and not exactly interested in taking on new responsibilities. But no, Synchron's my fun, my hobby, that'll do me now, and then I'm going to work out what the next phase of my life looks like. I haven't worked that out yet, but I'm trying to.
Well, you'll continue to be brilliant. Michael, thank you very much for speaking and for being so frank, so open and so sassy. I look forward to speaking to you again on the subject of selling, pure selling. Is that okay?
Yeah. Very happy to chat with you, Colin.
Good.
You've been listening to Be So Good with Colin Pearce. For more episodes, check the playlist at colinpearce.com/podcast. And don't forget to drop a review in the iTunes listing.